The security camera timestamp read 3:27 p.m. when 14-year-old Liam Porter walked through the sliding glass doors of St. Gabriel's Hospital for the last time. In his jacket pocket was a handmade card with two birds drawn in careful pencil. Strokes, a message of love that would later be found crumpled in a parking lot, as if the wind itself had tried to tell his story. He carried a thermos of homemade soup, wore a navy blue jacket with a small tear in the sleeve, and carried in his heart the desperate hope that somehow his presence alone could save his dying mother. Liam Porter was 14 years old when he disappeared inside those sterile walls. 14, with dark hair that perpetually fell across his forehead and eyes that held too much worry for someone his age. He'd been visiting his mother every day for 6 weeks, watching her fight an autoimmune disease that was slowly stealing her away from him, one labored breath at a time. That the morning of February 18, 2009, started like any other. Liam woke early, in the small blue house on Maple Street, the same house where he'd lived his entire life with his parents, Michael and Dana Porter. The walls were covered with his mother's watercolor paintings, landscapes of places she'd always wanted to visit, but never would. His father was already gone to work at the hardware store, leaving behind only the lingering scent of coffee and the weight of unspoken fears. Liam made himself toast, but couldn't eat it. His stomach had been in knots for weeks. Instead, he poured his mother's favorite vegetable soup into a thermos, the same recipe she'd taught him the summer before when she was still healthy, when her hands didn't shake and her voice didn't fade to a whisper. He folded the Get Well card he'd been working on, a simple drawing of two birds sitting on a tree branch, with "Get well soon, Mom. I love you," written in his careful handwriting. The card was childish, he knew, but Dana had always said his drawings were her favorite art in the whole world. She'd hung his kindergarten finger paintings next to her own canvases, claiming they were equally beautiful. He hoped this one might make her smile, even if just for a moment. At 3:15 p.m., Liam pulled on his navy blue jacket, the one with the small tear in the left sleeve from when he'd caught it on a fence helping his neighbor's cat, and stepped out into the overcast afternoon. Mrs. Chun from next door was watering her garden despite the threatening clouds. "Tell your mother I'm thinking of her," she called out, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd watched too many families face impossible things. "I will," Liam replied, adjusting his backpack and tucking the card safely into his jacket pocket. "She likes hearing from you." He walked the familiar route to St. Gabriel's, past the elementary school where he'd spent his childhood, past the corner grocery where Mr. Rodriguez always asked about his mother's condition, past the park where he and Dana used to feed ducks before the illness made walking difficult. The hospital loomed ahead, a 7-story brick building that had been the center of their family's universe for the past month and a half. The sliding doors whooshed open as he approached, and Liam nodded to the security guard, an older man named Pete, who'd gotten to know him over the weeks of daily visits. Pete looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Afternoon, Liam. How's Mom doing today?" "About the same," Liam said, signing his name on the visitor log. The pen felt heavy in his hand. "The doctors say she's stable, but ... He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what meant. The security camera above the reception desk recorded Liam Porter entering St. Gabriel's Hospital at exactly 3:27 p.m. It captured him walking toward the elevator bank, his shoulders slightly hunched, carrying the weight of a 14-year-old boy who'd grown up too fast. The timestamp on the footage would later be scrutinized by investigators, played and replayed until the numbers burned themselves into the memory of everyone who saw them. But that was the last time anyone would see Liam Porter alive. What the cameras didn't capture was the maze of corridors that existed beyond the main hospital floors, the maintenance tunnels, the service elevators, the forgotten rooms where medical equipment went to die. St. Gabriel's had been built in phases over several decades, creating a labyrinth of spaces that even long-time employees couldn't fully navigate. There were blind spots everywhere, dark corners where someone could disappear without a trace. Dr. Sarah Martinez was finishing her rounds on the third floor when she heard the commotion. She'd been working at St. Gabriel's for 5 years, long enough to know that hospitals were places where bad news traveled fast and hope moved slowly. She was heading toward the nurse's station when she saw him, a middle-aged man in a maintenance uniform, moving quickly down the hallway with something bundled in his arms. "Excuse me," she called out, but the man didn't stop. He turned the corner toward the service elevator, and by the time Dr. Martinez reached the spot where he'd been standing, he was gone. She thought about it later, during the investigation that would consume the next several months. The man's face had been partially obscured by shadow, but there was something about the way he moved urgent, furtive, like someone trying not to be seen. She'd mentioned it to the police, but without being able to identify him specifically, it became just another piece of information in a case that had too many questions and not enough answers. Meanwhile, on the 4th floor, Donna Porter lay in room 302, drifting in and out of consciousness under the influence of morphine. Her body was losing the battle against the autoimmune disease that had been attacking her organs for months. The doctors had stopped talking about recovery and started using words like comfort and dignity. She was aware enough to know that. Visiting hours were almost over, and Liam hadn't come yet. He'd never missed a day. Even when he was sick with the flu the month before, he'd insisted on coming, wearing a mask and sitting farther from her bed than usual. She'd watch him do homework at the small table by the window, occasionally looking up to catch her eye and smile. "Where's my boy?" she whispered to the nurse, who came to check her vitals. "I'm sure he'll be here soon, Mrs. Porter," the nurse replied. But her eyes held a concern that Dana was too medicated to fully register Dot by 5:30 p.m. When visiting hours ended, Liam still hadn't appeared. Donna fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of the watercolor landscapes on her walls, of places she'd never see, of conversations with her son that she'd never have. The first 24 hours of a missing person case are crucial, but in Liam's case, those hours slipped away in a haze of bureaucratic confusion and misplaced assumptions. The hospital security office didn't report him missing until the next morning, operating under the belief that he'd simply left through a different exit. The police initially treated it as a runaway case, a teenager overwhelmed by his mother's illness who decided to escape the pressure. Detective Ray Coleman had been working missing persons cases for 15 years, and he'd seen his share of kids who'd run away from difficult situations. But something about Liam Porter's disappearance felt different from the moment he walked into the family's small house on Maple Street. Michael Porter was a man destroyed. He sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at the phone as if willing it to ring with news that his son was safe. The house felt frozen in time. Liam's backpack still hung on the hook by the door, his homework half finished on the dining room table, his bed unmade from the morning. He'd never returned to sleep in it. "He wouldn't run away," Michael kept repeating, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "You don't understand. He's been taking care of his mother, visiting her every single day. He wouldn't abandon her. Not when she's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Detective Coleman had heard similar protests from other families, but Michael Porter's certainty was different. It wasn't the desperate denial of a parent who couldn't accept difficult truths about their child. It was the bone-deep knowledge of a father who knew his son's character better than anyone else in the world. "Tell me about his state of mind," Coleman said gently. "Was he depressed? Anxious about his mother's condition?" "Of course he was anxious," Michael replied, his voice gaining strength. "But he was handling it. He was being braver than any 14-year-old should have to be. He made her soup every morning before school. He drew pictures for her. He talked to her about normal things, his classes, his friends, movies he wanted to watch with her when she got better. When she got better, Michael's face crumpled. He still believed she was going to get better, even when we knew she probably wasn't. He had hope. That's not the mindset of a kid who runs away. The investigation officially began 3 days after Liam's disappearance, when it became clear that he hadn't returned home or contacted anyone he knew. Detective Coleman assembled a team that included hospital security, local police, and eventually state investigators. They interviewed everyone who might have seen Liam that day, reviewed security footage from multiple angles, and searched every public area of the hospital. The footage from the main lobby showed Liam entering the building at 3:27 p.m., but the cameras on the upper floors revealed nothing. He'd taken the elevator to the 4th floor, the same floor where his mother was staying, but there was no footage of him exiting the elevator or walking down the corridors. It was as if he'd simply vanished into the walls themselves. Janet? Rodriguez worked the afternoon shift at the hospital cafeteria and had gotten to know Liam over the weeks of his daily visits. He was polite, quiet, and always ordered the same thing: a small cup of vegetable soup to go with whatever homemade food he'd brought for himself. She'd started giving him extra crackers without charging for them, a small kindness that seemed to matter to the boy who was trying so hard to be strong. He was here that day, she told Detective Coleman during her interview. I saw him go past the cafeteria around 3:30, maybe 3:35. He was walking toward the elevator bank like always, but there was something different about him. Different how? L-O-O-K-E-D. I don't know how to explain it. Determined? Like he was going somewhere specific, not just visiting his mom. He was walking faster than usual, and he looked over his shoulder once, like he was checking to see if someone was following him. This detail would haunt Coleman for years. If Liam had been walking with unusual purpose, if he'd been looking over his shoulder, it suggested he might have been meeting someone or going somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. But it also raised the possibility that he'd been followed, that someone had been watching him during his daily visits and waiting for the right moment to act. The search of the hospital began with the obvious places: patient rooms, waiting areas, bathrooms, supply closets. But St. Gabriel's was a complex building with multiple wings, sub-basements, and service areas that required special access. The maintenance tunnels alone formed a network of passages that connected different parts of the hospital, most of them poorly lit and rarely monitored. Thomas Brennan was the head of hospital maintenance, a man who'd worked at St. Gabriel's for over 20 years and knew every pipe, wire, and ventilation shaft in the building. He joined the search efforts, bringing blueprints and keycards that could access restricted areas. The thing about this place, he explained to Detective Coleman as they walked through a narrow corridor lined with electrical panels, is that it's been renovated so many times that there are spaces that don't officially exist anymore. Rooms that were sealed off, passages that were forgotten when new wings were added. If someone wanted to hide something or someone, they could do it. The search teams found nothing in the main hospital areas, but the maintenance tunnels presented a different challenge. Some of them were so narrow that only one person could walk through at a time. Others opened into larger spaces that had been used for storage decades earlier and then abandoned. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old building materials, and the lighting was sporadic at best. In one of the sub-basement tunnels, they found a candy wrapper that matched the brand sold in the hospital vending machines. It was faded and covered in dust, but it could have been from any time in the past several months. Without more context, it was just another piece of debris in a building full of forgotten things. The search continued for weeks, expanding beyond the hospital to include the surrounding neighborhood, nearby parks, and even the river that ran through town. Volunteers from the community joined the effort, walking in organized lines through wooded areas and vacant lots, hoping to find some trace of the missing boy. But Liam Porter had simply vanished as the investigation stretched into its second month. The focus began to shift toward the hospital staff. Detective Coleman and his team interviewed everyone who had access to the building that day, from doctors and nurses to custodial workers and food service employees. Most of the interviews were routine, producing nothing more than expressions of sympathy and frustration that such a thing could happen in their workplace. One interview, however, stood out. David Marsh worked the evening maintenance shift at St. Gabriel's, arriving at 4 p.m. and working until midnight. He was a quiet man in his 40s, divorced, living alone in a small apartment across town. He'd been employed by the hospital for 3 years, and his work record was generally clean, though there had been a few complaints about his interactions with female staff members. "I saw the kid around," Marsh told Detective Coleman during their interview. "He came every day to visit his mom. Seemed like a good kid. Did you see him on February 18th? Maybe. I see a lot of people. They all kind of blur together after a while. This would have been important to you, though. A missing child in the hospital where you work." Marsh shifted in his chair, his eyes darting away from Coleman's steady gaze. "I heard about it, yeah. Terrible thing. But I don't know anything about where he went." "Where were you between 3:30 and 5:30 that afternoon?" "Working, doing my rounds. I can show you the maintenance logs if you want." Coleman did want to see the logs, and when he reviewed them, he found that Marsh had signed in for work at 4 p.m. as usual, but there was something odd about the entries. The handwriting was different from his usual style, more careful, more deliberate, as if he'd been conscious of creating a record that would be scrutinized. A background check on David Marsh revealed a troubling detail. 3 years earlier, before he'd started working at St. Gabriel's, he'd been arrested on charges of child endangerment. The charges had been dropped when the key witness, a 12-year-old girl, recanted her statement, but the arrest remained on his record. Coleman wanted to dig deeper, but the hospital administration was becoming increasingly resistant to the investigation. St. Gabriel's was a private facility, and the prolonged police presence was affecting their operations and their reputation. They'd cooperated fully in the initial search, but as weeks turned into months with no results, they began to push back against requests for additional access and information. "We've done everything we can," said Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the hospital's chief administrator. "We've allowed your team to search every accessible area of the building. We've interviewed our entire staff. We've provided security footage and employment records. At some point, you have to accept that the answer might not be here." But Detective Coleman couldn't accept that. The security footage showed Liam entering the hospital and never leaving, unless he'd somehow evaded every camera and walked out through a service exit, which seemed unlikely given the boy's routine and personality. Something had happened to him inside those walls. The investigation hit another roadblock when David Marsh suddenly resigned from his position and moved out of state. When Coleman tried to locate him for a follow-up interview, he discovered that Marsh had left no forwarding address and had apparently taken steps to make himself difficult to find. This raised immediate red flags, but without evidence of wrongdoing, there was little Coleman could do beyond adding Marsh's name to a watch list. As spring turned to summer, the search for Liam Porter began to lose momentum. The media attention faded, the volunteer search parties disbanded, and the case was relegated to the cold files in the detective bureau. Michael Porter refused to accept this reality. He continued to push for answers, attending every city council meeting, organizing his own search efforts, and maintaining a website dedicated to finding his son. in room 302 of St. Gabriel's Hospital. Dana Porter fought her own losing battle. The stress of her son's disappearance had accelerated her physical decline, and the doctors warned Michael that she might not survive the summer. She spent her lucid moments asking about Liam, begging her husband to keep looking, to never give up hope that their boy was still alive somewhere. "He's coming back," she whispered during one of her clearer moments. "I can feel it. He's trying to get back to me." Dana Porter died on August 15, 2009, 6 months after her son disappeared. She never learned what happened to Liam, never got to hold him one last time, never got to see the get-well card he'd made for her on the last day of his life. Michael found the card later, crumpled and rain-stained in the hospital parking lot, as if it had been discarded by someone who didn't understand its value. The funeral was small, attended by family, friends, and a few hospital staff members who'd cared for Dana during her final months. Detective Coleman came to pay his respects, still carrying the weight of his failure to find her son. After the service, he approached Michael Porter with a promise that would define the rest of his career. "I'm not giving up," Coleman said. "I know everyone thinks the trail has gone cold, but I'm not walking away from this. Your son deserves answers, and your wife deserved to know what happened to him." Michael Porter nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you." Dana always said, "You were a good man." She believed you'd find him. For the next 15 years, Detective Coleman would work the Liam Porter case in his spare time, long after he was officially reassigned to other investigations. He kept copies of all the files in his home office, reviewed the security footage periodically, and maintained contact with anyone who might have information about the disappearance. He tracked down David Marsh twice over the years, interviewing him in different states, but never found evidence strong enough to make an arrest. The case became Coleman's obsession, the one that defined his career and haunted his retirement. He knew that somewhere in the maze of St. Gabriel's Hospital there were answers waiting to be found. He just had to figure out where to look. Meanwhile, St. Gabriel's Hospital continued to operate, expanding its services and renovating its facilities. The third floor was converted into a specialized cardiac unit in 2012. The old cafeteria was relocated to the ground floor in 2015. The maintenance tunnels were gradually modernized, with new lighting and security systems installed throughout the building. But some areas remained untouched, forgotten spaces where dust gathered and memories lingered. The eastern wing of the hospital, where the oldest maintenance corridors were located, developed problems with water damage and mold. By 2018, entire sections had been sealed off, deemed too expensive to repair and too dangerous to use. In 2023, St. Gabriel's was acquired by a larger healthcare network that announced plans for a comprehensive renovation. The new owners wanted to transform the aging facility into a modern medical center, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and patient amenities. The renovation would require gutting significant portions of the building, including the sealed-off sections that had been abandoned for years. The construction began in January 2024, starting with the demolition of the old eastern wing. The work was supervised by Morrison Construction, a company that specialized in healthcare facility renovations. The crew included skilled tradesmen who were experienced in working around the unique challenges of hospital construction, the need to maintain sterile environments, the complex network of utilities, and the requirement to keep the facility operational during construction. Jake Morrison, the project foreman, had been doing hospital renovations for over a decade. He'd seen his share of strange discoveries during demolition work, old medical equipment, forgotten documents, even the occasional time capsule left by previous renovation crews. But he'd never found anything like what his team would discover in the walls of Vols, St. Gabriel's. The demolition of the eastern wing began with the removal of fixtures and equipment, followed by the careful dismantling of interior walls. The work was slow and methodical, requiring constant attention to avoid damaging the building's structural elements or disrupting the hospital's operations in other areas. On the evening of March 15, 2024, Jake Morrison was working late with a small crew, trying to stay on schedule for the project's next phase. They were demolishing a section of the maintenance corridor that had been sealed off for years, using sledgehammers and crowbars to break through the old drywall and expose the building's bones. Carlos Vega, one of the crew members, was working on a wall panel near the old service elevator when he noticed something unusual. The panel seemed to be separated from the wall behind it, creating a gap that shouldn't have existed according to the building's blueprints. "Hey, Jake," Carlos called out. "Come look at this." Morrison examined the wall panel and confirmed that there was indeed a space behind it, possibly a utility chase or storage area that hadn't been documented in the plans. Such discoveries weren't uncommon in older buildings, but they always required investigation to ensure that important systems weren't accidentally damaged. "Let's open it up and see what's in there," Morrison decided. "But be careful. There might be electrical lines or plumbing that we don't want to hit." Carlos used a crowbar to pry the panel away from the wall, revealing a narrow cavity filled with insulation and debris. The space was dark and musty, clearly undisturbed for years. As Carlos shone his flashlight into the opening, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Wrapped in what appeared to be an old sheet or towel was a bundle of clothing, and protruding from the bundle was what looked like a sleeve navy blue fabric with a small tear near the cuff. "Jesus Christ," Carlos whispered, stepping back from the opening. "Jake, you need to see this." Morrison looked into the cavity and immediately understood the significance of what they'd found. He'd lived in the area for most of his life, and he remembered the story of the boy who disappeared in the hospital 15 years earlier. The case had been front-page news for months, a mystery that had never been solved. "Nobody touches anything else," Morrison ordered. "We're calling the police right now." Within an hour, St. Gabriel's Hospital was surrounded by police cars, ambulances, and news vans. Detective Ray Coleman, now retired but still living in the area, received a call from his former partner at 11:30 p.m. The news hit him like a physical blow. After 15 years of searching, they'd finally found something. The recovery of the items from the wall cavity was handled by the county coroner's office and the state crime lab, with Detective Coleman serving as an observer. The bundle contained a navy blue jacket, size medium, with a small tear in the left sleeve. In the jacket's pocket was a folded piece of paper, a handmade get well card with a drawing of 2 birds and a message written in careful teenage handwriting. "Get well soon. Mom, I love you." Also found in the cavity were a broken hospital keycard, a faded candy wrapper, and a small thermos that still contained traces of vegetable soup. But there was no body, no other clothing, no additional evidence that might explain how these items had ended up hidden in the wall. The discovery made national news within hours. The story of the missing boy, whose jacket had been found in a hospital wall, captured the public imagination, generating thousands of social media posts and cable news segments. But for the people who'd lived through the original investigation, the find raised more questions than it answered. DNA analysis confirmed that the jacket belonged to Liam Porter. The handwriting on the card matched samples from his school notebooks. The thermos contained his fingerprints. But the condition of the items suggested they'd been placed in the wall cavity shortly after his disappearance, not recently. "This tells us that something happened to Liam in that hospital," Detective Coleman explained to the media. "But it doesn't tell us what happened or where he is now." The investigation reopened with renewed energy. A new team of detectives, led by Detective Sarah Chun, began reviewing the original case files and conducting fresh interviews with anyone who might have information about the 2009 disappearance. The hospital administration, now under different ownership, cooperated fully with the investigation. The discovery of the jacket also led to a more detailed examination of the hospital's layout, particularly the maintenance areas and service corridors. Using updated blueprints and ground-penetrating radar, investigators found several spaces that hadn't been thoroughly searched during the original investigation. One area of particular interest was a narrow crawl space that ran between the third and fourth floors, directly behind room 302, the room where Dana Porter had been staying. The space was accessible through a service panel in the maintenance corridor, but it would have required specific knowledge of the building's layout to find it. Someone who worked here would have known about that space, Detective Chun explained. It's not something a 14-year-old boy would have discovered on his own. The investigation focused renewed attention on David Marsh, the former maintenance worker who'd left the state shortly after Liam's disappearance. Marsh was now in his late 50s, living under a different name in Oregon. When detectives located him, he agreed to an interview but maintained his innocence. "I didn't have anything to do with that kid's disappearance," Marsh insisted. "I've been living with the suspicion for 15 years, and I'm tired of it. I left town because everyone looked at me like I was some kind of monster, not because I was guilty of anything." Marsh's alibi for the day of the disappearance remained the same as it had been in 2009, but investigators now had more sophisticated tools to examine his claims. Cell phone records, credit card transactions, and surveillance footage from businesses near the hospital painted a more complete picture of his movements that day. The analysis revealed something troubling. Despite Marsh's claims that he'd been working his regular maintenance rounds, there was a gap in his documented activities between 3:30 and 4:15 p.m., exactly the time when Liam Porter had been in the hospital. Security footage showed Marsh entering the maintenance area at 3:25 p.m., but he didn't appear on any other cameras until 4:20 p.m., when he was seen leaving the service elevator on the fourth floor. "That's not proof of anything," Marsh's attorney argued. "My client was doing his job, which involved working in areas that weren't covered by security cameras. The fact that he can't account for every minute of his day doesn't make him responsible for this tragedy." But the timeline was troubling enough to warrant further investigation. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Marsh's current residence and for storage units he'd rented over the years. They found nothing directly related to Liam Porter's disappearance, but they did find evidence that suggested Marsh had been more interested in the case than he'd admitted. In a box of personal papers, investigators found newspaper clippings about the disappearance, photocopies of some of the missing person flyers, and a hospital floor plan that had been marked with handwritten notes. The notes didn't contain any confessions or admissions of guilt, but they showed a level of attention to the case that went beyond normal concern. "He was obsessed with it," Detective Chun observed, "either because he was guilty and worried about getting caught, or because he was innocent and frustrated by the suspicion. Either way, he was paying a lot more attention to this case than he let on." The investigation also revealed new information about the hospital's internal security systems. In 2009, the building's key card access system had been upgraded several times over the years, but investigators were able to recover some of the original data. The analysis showed that David Marsh's keycard had been used to access the fourth floor maintenance area at 3:31 p.m. on the day of Liam's disappearance, just 4 minutes after the boy had entered the hospital. This discovery was significant because Marsh had claimed he'd been working in the basement at that time. The keycard data suggested he'd been on the same floor where Liam was visiting his mother during the exact time period when the boy had disappeared. Confronted with this evidence, Marsh finally admitted that he'd been on the fourth floor that afternoon, but he maintained his innocence regarding Liam's disappearance. "Okay, I was there," he said during a second interview. "I was checking on some pipework behind the patient rooms. But I didn't see the kid, and I didn't hurt him. I lied about where I was, because I knew it would look bad. But that doesn't make me guilty. Why would it look bad if you were just doing your job? Detective Chun asked. Marsh hesitated, then finally revealed the truth he'd been hiding for 15 years. Because I wasn't supposed to be there. The work I was doing, it wasn't authorized. I was trying to fix a problem with the water pressure in that wing, but I was supposed to wait for approval from the administration. I was cutting corners, trying to get it done before anyone noticed. This explanation was plausible, but it didn't address the most important question. What had happened to Liam Porter? Even if Marsh had been working in the maintenance area legitimately, the boy's jacket and personal belongings had somehow ended up hidden in the wall. Someone had put them there, and that someone had to have detailed knowledge of the building's layout. The investigation expanded to include other hospital employees who'd had access to the building in 2009. Many of them had moved on to other jobs or had retired, but detectives tracked down dozens of former workers for interviews. Most of them had alibis or could provide information that ruled them out as suspects. One interview, however, provided a potential breakthrough. Dr. Marcus Webb had been a resident physician at St. Gabriel's in 2009, working long hours in the emergency department. He remembered the day Liam disappeared because it had been particularly busy, with multiple ambulances arriving throughout the afternoon. I was running between the A and the 4th floor that day, Dr. Webb told Detective Chun. We had a patient who needed surgery, and I was coordinating with the surgical team. I remember taking the service elevator because the main elevators were crowded. Did you see anything unusual? Anyone who shouldn't have been there? Actually, yes. I saw a maintenance worker in the corridor outside the patient rooms. He was carrying something looked like a bundle of clothing or linens. I thought it was odd because the housekeeping staff usually handled that kind of thing, and they used different elevators. Can you describe the maintenance worker? Middle-aged, average height, wearing the standard hospital maintenance uniform. I didn't get a good look at his face, but he seemed to be in a hurry. He was walking toward the service elevator when I saw him. Dr. Webb's description matched David Marsh's appearance, and the timing aligned with the gap in Marsh's alibi. But the doctor couldn't make a positive identification, and the bundle he'd seen could have been anything from laundry to medical supplies. Still, the testimony added another piece to the puzzle. If Marsh had been carrying something that day, it might explain how Liam's jacket and personal items had ended up in the wall cavity. But it still didn't explain what had happened to Liam himself. The investigation took another turn when Detective Chun decided to examine the hospital's employee records more carefully. She was looking for anyone who'd left the hospital shortly after Liam's disappearance, anyone who'd been disciplined for inappropriate behavior, or anyone who'd had unusual access to the building's maintenance areas. One name that appeared repeatedly in the records was Thomas Brennan, the head of hospital maintenance who'd helped with the original search efforts. Brennan had been with St. Gabriel's for over 20 years, and he'd been the one who provided the blueprints and keycards that had allowed investigators to search the building's hidden spaces. But there was something troubling in Brennan's employment file. In 2010, just a year after Liam's disappearance, he'd been investigated for using hospital resources for personal projects. The investigation had found that Brennan had been using the hospital's workshop to repair items from his home, and that he'd been taking materials without permission. The investigation hadn't resulted in his termination, but it had revealed that Brennan had been less than honest about his activities. If he'd been willing to lie about minor infractions, what else might he have been hiding? Detective Chun arranged to interview Brennan, who is now retired and living in Florida. The interview was conducted over video call, with Brennan appearing cooperative but somewhat nervous. I remember the Porter case very well, Brennan said. It was a tragedy. We all felt terrible that something like that could happen in our hospital. You helped with the search efforts. Did you have any theories about what might have happened to Liam? I thought maybe he'd gotten lost in the maintenance tunnels somehow. Those areas can be confusing, especially for someone who doesn't work there. But we searched everywhere, and we never found anything. Is it possible that someone could have hidden something in the building without your knowledge? Brennan paused, considering the question. It's possible, I guess. There were areas that I didn't check regularly, especially in the older parts of the building. But anyone who wanted to hide something would have needed access to those areas, and they would have needed to know the building pretty well. Like David Marsh, David was a good worker. A little antisocial, maybe, but he knew the building. If someone was going to hide something, he would have had the knowledge and the access to do it. The interview didn't provide any new evidence, but it reinforced the theory that Liam's disappearance had been an inside job. Someone with detailed knowledge of the hospital's layout had been responsible for hiding the boy's belongings, and possibly for whatever had happened to Liam himself. As the investigation continued, Detective Chun began to focus on the timeline of events on the day of the disappearance. The security footage showed Liam entering the hospital at 3:27 p.m., but the cameras on the upper floors had recorded nothing unusual. The boy had simply vanished somewhere between the lobby and his mother's room. But what if he'd never made it to his mother's room? What if something had happened to him in the elevator or in the corridor leading to the 4th floor? The security cameras had blind spots, areas where someone could have intercepted Liam without being recorded. This theory led to a more detailed examination of the hospital's service elevator, the one that David Marsh had been used that day. The elevator had been replaced during a renovation in 2015, but the shaft itself remained unchanged. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators found an anomaly in the elevator shaft, a sealed opening that hadn't been documented in the building's current blueprints. The opening was located between the 3rd and 4th floors, accessible only from inside the elevator shaft itself. It appeared to be an old maintenance access point that had been sealed off years ago, possibly during one of the building's many renovations. The opening was small enough that an adult would have difficulty fitting through it, but a teenage boy could have easily entered the space. If someone wanted to hide something or someone, this would be the perfect place, Detective Chun observed as she examined the sealed opening. It's not on any of the current building plans. It's not accessible from the main floors, and it's in a location that wouldn't be routinely inspected. The decision to open the sealed access point was made with careful consideration. The hospital was still operational, and any work in the elevator shaft would require significant safety measures and coordination with the building's current management. The work was scheduled for a weekend when the service elevator could be taken out of operation temporarily. The team that opened the access point included Detective Chun, a forensic technician, and a professional contractor who specialized in confined space work. As they carefully removed the drywall and insulation that had sealed the opening, they found themselves looking into a narrow service corridor that ran behind the patient. Rooms on the 4th floor. The corridor was barely wide enough for a single person to walk through, and it was completely dark except for the light from their flashlights. The air was stale and dusty, with the smell of old building materials and something that made the forensic technician immediately call for additional equipment. I'm getting a positive reading for organic decomposition, the technician reported. It's faint, but it's definitely there. We need to proceed with full hazmat protocols. The discovery of possible decomposition in the sealed corridor was both exciting and terrifying for the investigators. After 15 years of wondering what had happened to Liam Horder, they might finally have found the answer. But the thought of what they might find in that narrow space was almost too much to bear. The careful exploration of the service corridor took most of the day. This space was longer than expected, running almost the entire length of the fourth floor and connecting to several other maintenance access points. Most of the corridor was empty, except for old pipes, electrical conduits, and decades of accumulated dust and debris. But in one section of the corridor, directly behind room 302, where Dana Porter had been staying, they found something that made the entire investigation team stop in their tracks. There, in a small alcove off the main corridor, was a makeshift bed. A thin mattress, probably taken from a storage area, covered with a hospital blanket. Next to it was a small pile of personal items, a backpack, some books, and what appeared to be several days' worth of food wrappers. And next to the makeshift bed, they found bones. The remains were clearly human, and the size and condition suggested they had been there for many years. The skeleton was incomplete, with some bones missing or scattered, but there was enough present to make a preliminary identification. The femur length and skull measurements were consistent with a teenage boy, and the estimated age of the remains matched the timeline of Liam Porter's disappearance. Dr. Lisa Hartwell, the forensic anthropologist who was brought in to examine the remains, made a discovery that shocked everyone involved in the investigation. Based on the bone development and the presence of certain items found with the remains, she concluded that Liam Porter had been alive for several weeks after his disappearance. The evidence suggests that this young man was living in this space for an extended period, Dr. Hartwell explained to the investigative team. There are signs of healing in one of the arm bones, consistent with an injury that occurred after he was reported missing. The food wrappers and other items suggest he was being sustained by someone who had access to hospital supplies. This discovery completely changed the nature of the investigation. Rather than a simple case of kidnapping or murder, it appeared that Liam Porter had been held captive in the hospital for weeks or possibly months after his disappearance. Someone had been keeping him alive, feeding him, and providing basic necessities while he was hidden in the service corridor. The implications were horrifying. While his family had been searching for him, while his mother had been dying in the room just on the other side of the wall, Liam had been alive and imprisoned mere feet away. The cruelty of the situation was almost incomprehensible. Detective Chun launched a new phase of the investigation, focusing on anyone who would have had regular access to the hospital and the ability to move freely through the building's maintenance areas. The list of suspects was small but significant. David Marsh, Thomas Brennan, and a few other maintenance workers who had worked at the hospital during the relevant time period. The investigation also revealed new evidence about the hospital's security systems. A more detailed analysis of the key card access records showed that someone had been using the service elevator and accessing the fourth floor maintenance area on a regular basis during the weeks following Liam's disappearance. The pattern of access was consistent with someone who was providing care to a hidden person, but the key card records were incomplete, and many of the access codes had been shared among maintenance workers. It was impossible to determine definitively who had been using the areas, but the pattern of access coincided with the shifts worked by David Marsh and Thomas Brennan. When confronted with this new evidence, both men continued to maintain their innocence. Marsh's lawyer argued that his client had been working in the maintenance areas as part of his regular duties, and that there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Brennan pointed out that as head of maintenance, he would have had legitimate reasons to access those areas during the investigation and cleanup period. But one piece of evidence was particularly damning. Among the items found with Liam's remains was a maintenance worker's badge. The badge had been issued to David Marsh in 2008, and it had been reported missing in March 2009, just 1 month after Liam's disappearance. "I lost that badge," Marsh insisted when confronted with the evidence. "I reported it missing to my supervisor. I have no idea how it ended up in that crawl space." The discovery of the badge, combined with the other evidence, was enough to convince prosecutors to bring charges against David Marsh. He was arrested on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and murder in the first degree. The case made headlines around the world as the details of Liam Porter's imprisonment and death were revealed to the public. The story that emerged from the investigation was one of unimaginable cruelty. According to the prosecution's theory, Marsh had encountered Liam in the hospital corridor on the day of his disappearance and had lured him into the service elevator. From there, he had taken the boy to the hidden service corridor, where he had kept him prisoner for weeks. That the motive for the crime remained unclear. Marsh had no prior history of violence against children, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. The prosecution suggested that Marsh had initially planned to release Liam, but had panicked when the investigation began and realized he couldn't let the boy go without being identified. This was a crime of opportunity that became a crime of desperation, the prosecutor argued during the trial. The defendant had access to a secret location where he could hold a child prisoner without being discovered. When he realized he couldn't let the boy go, he made the decision to let him die. The defense countered that the evidence against Marsh was circumstantial and that the prosecution's timeline was based on speculation rather than facts. They argued that any one of several maintenance workers could have been responsible for the crime, and that the jury should not convict based on suspicion alone. The trial lasted for 3 weeks, with testimony from forensic experts, former hospital employees, and family members. The most emotional moment came when Michael Porter took the witness stand to describe the 15 years of uncertainty and pain he had endured since his son's disappearance. "I never stopped looking for him," Michael sighed, his voice breaking. "Even when everyone said he was probably dead, I kept hoping he was out there somewhere. I never imagined he was so close, suffering while I was going to work every day just a few miles away." The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdict. They found David Marsh guilty of kidnapping and false imprisonment, but not guilty of murder. The jury foreman explained later that while they believed Marsh had held Liam prisoner, they weren't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he had intentionally killed the boy. The verdict was controversial, with many people feeling that Marsh had gotten away with murder. But for the Porter family, the most important thing was that they finally had answers. After 15 years of wondering what had happened to Liam, they knew where he had been and how he had died. The discovery of Liam's remains also provided some closure for the hospital staff who had been involved in the original search. Many of them had carried guilt for years, feeling that they had somehow failed to find the missing boy. The revelation that he had been hidden in an area that wasn't accessible to the search teams helped ease that burden. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the physician who had seen someone carrying a bundle on the day of the disappearance, was one of the many staff members who attended the memorial service for Liam. She had always wondered whether she could have done something different, whether she could have saved him if she had acted more quickly. "I've thought about that day every single day for 15 years, she said during the service. "I wish I had chased after that man in the hallway. I wish I had asked more questions. But I know now that Liam was surrounded by people who loved him, even if we couldn't save him." The memorial service was held in the hospital's main lobby, with a small plaque placed near the entrance to honor Liam's memory. The plaque read, "In memory of Liam Porter, who sought only to bring comfort to his mother and found, instead, a courage beyond his years." The service was attended by hundreds of people, including family members, hospital staff, investigators, and members of the community who had been touched by Liam's story. The ceremony was simple but powerful, with speakers sharing memories of the boy who had been known for his kindness and his devotion to his mother. Michael Porter spoke last. sharing his gratitude for the people who had never given up on finding his son. He also announced the establishment of the Liam Porter Foundation, which would work to improve security systems in hospitals and other public buildings to prevent similar tragedies. Liam was a good boy who loved his mother and wanted to make her feel better, Michael said. He doesn't deserve to be remembered as a victim. He deserves to be remembered as a son who loved his family and who brought joy to everyone who knew him. The Foundation's first project was the installation of comprehensive security systems at St. Gabriel's Hospital, including cameras in all maintenance areas and electronic locks on all service corridors. The system was designed to prevent unauthorized access to restricted areas while still allowing authorized personnel to do their jobs. The hospital also implemented new procedures for employee background checks and supervision of maintenance workers. The goal was to create a safer environment for patients and visitors while honoring the memory of the boy who had been lost in their halls. As the legal proceedings continued, investigators continued to search for any additional evidence that might help them understand what had happened to Liam during his final weeks. The forensic analysis of the remains and the items found with them provided some insight into his condition and the circumstances of his death. Dr. Hartwell's final report revealed that Liam had suffered from malnutrition and dehydration in his final weeks, suggesting that his captor had been providing insufficient food and water. There were also signs of physical abuse, including healed fractures in his arm and ribs that had occurred after his disappearance. The most heartbreaking discovery was a piece of paper found among his personal items. It was a letter that Liam had written to his mother, apparently during his captivity. The letter was filled with hope and love, with the boy expressing his belief that he would soon be able to see her again. "Dear Mom," the letter read, "I know. You must be worried about me, but I'm okay. I'm in a place where I can't come to see you right now, but I'm thinking about you every day. I hope you're feeling better and that the doctors are taking good care of you. I love you so much, and I can't wait to see you again soon. Your son, Liam." The letter was dated 3 weeks after Liam's disappearance, providing concrete proof that he had been alive and conscious during his captivity. It was the final piece of evidence that the family needed to understand what their son had endured during his final weeks. The revelation that Liam had been alive for so long after his disappearance was both a source of comfort and additional pain for his family. They were relieved to know that he had survived for longer than they had feared, but they were devastated by the knowledge that he had been suffering while they had been searching for him. Michael Porter struggled with the guilt of not being able to save his son, despite the fact that no one could have imagined where Liam was hidden. The family sought counseling to help them process their grief and anger, and they relied on the support of their community to get through the difficult days following the discovery. The case also had a profound impact on the investigators who had worked on it. Detective Coleman, who had carried the weight of the unsolved case for 15 years, finally had the closure he had been seeking. But the satisfaction of solving the case was tempered by the knowledge of what Liam had endured. "I always hoped we'd find him alive," Coleman said during a post-trial interview. "But even after we found his remains, I was hoping for a different story. The reality of what happened to that boy is something I'll never forget." The case also highlighted the importance of persistence in law enforcement. The discovery of Liam's remains had come about only because of the hospital renovation, but the investigation that followed had been thorough and determined. The investigators had refused to accept easy answers and had continued to search for the truth even when it was difficult to find. Detective Chun, who had led the reopened investigation, emphasized the importance of using new technology and techniques to solve old cases. The DNA analysis, the examination of keycard records, and the forensic anthropology work had all been crucial to understanding what had happened to Liam. This case shows that we should never give up on finding answers. Chun said, "Technology advances, new evidence can be discovered, and witnesses sometimes come forward years later. The families of missing persons deserve to know what happened to their loved ones, no matter how much time has passed." The case also had a lasting impact on the hospital industry. The discovery that someone had been able to hold a child prisoner in a major medical facility for weeks without being detected led to a reevaluation of security procedures at hospitals across the country. Many facilities implemented new policies requiring more comprehensive background checks for maintenance workers and better surveillance of restricted areas. The story of Liam Porter also raised awareness about the vulnerability of children in public places. The case served as a reminder that even in places that are supposed to be safe, such as hospitals, there are risks that must be addressed through proper security measures and vigilant oversight. As the years passed, the case became a symbol of the importance of never giving up on finding the truth. The determination of the investigators, the persistence of the family, and the eventual discovery of the evidence all contributed to a resolution that had seemed impossible for 15 years. The story of Liam Porter's disappearance and the discovery of his remains was documented in numerous books, documentaries, and television programs. The case became one of the most famous missing person cases in the country, partly because of the unusual circumstances of the discovery, and partly because of the emotional impact of the story. But for the Porter family, the most important legacy of the case was the Liam Porter Foundation and the work it did to improve safety in public buildings. The foundation's efforts led to new security measures at hospitals, schools, and other facilities, helping to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. The foundation also provided support for families of missing children, offering resources and assistance to help them navigate the difficult process of searching for their loved ones. The work was a way for the Porter family to honor Liam's memory while helping others who were facing similar challenges. The case also served as a reminder of the importance of community support during times of crisis. The search for Liam had brought together people from all walks of life, united in their desire to find the missing boy. The continued support the family received during the legal proceedings and afterward was a testament to the power of community in times of need. As the story of Liam Porter continued to be told, it served as a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, should never be abandoned. The case showed that even when a mystery seems impossible to solve, the combination of persistence, technology, and community support can lead to answers. The legacy of the case was also evident in the changes it brought to the hospital where Liam had disappeared. St. Gabriel's Hospital was transformed from a place of tragedy into a beacon of safety and security, with new procedures and technology designed to protect patients and visitors. The hospital also established a memorial garden in honor of Liam Porter with a plaque that read, "In memory of Liam Porter, who reminded us that love endures even in the darkest places." The garden became a place where visitors could reflect on the boy's story and the importance of protecting children in all environments. The case of Liam Porter's disappearance and discovery remains one of the most compelling and tragic stories in recent memory. It is a story of loss and grief, but also of persistence and hope. It is a reminder that even in the worst circumstances, there are people who will never give up on finding the truth and seeking justice for those who cannot speak for themselves. The discovery of Liam's jacket in the hospital wall was just the beginning of a story that would ultimately reveal the truth about what had happened to him. The jacket, with its small tear and the get well card in the pocket, became a symbol of the love between a mother and son and the tragedy that had separated them forever. But the story of Liam Porter is also a story of resilience and hope. A family's determination to find answers, the community's support during the search, and the investigators' refusal to give up all contributed to a resolution that brought justice and closure to a case that had haunted the town for 15 years. The legacy of the case continues to this day. Through the work of the Liam Porter Foundation and the changes it brought to hospital security procedures, the story serves as a reminder that tragedy can lead to positive change, and that the memory of those we've lost can inspire us to protect others who are vulnerable. As the years continue to pass, the story of Liam Porter remains a powerful reminder of the importance of never giving up on the search for truth and justice. It is a story that will continue to inspire and challenge us to create a safer world for all children. The case also demonstrated the evolving nature of criminal investigation. The use of DNA analysis, electronic record examination, and forensic anthropology all played crucial roles in solving the case. These techniques, many of which were not available or were not as advanced in 2009, showed how technology could be used to solve cold cases and bring closure to families. The story of Liam Porter's disappearance and discovery will be remembered as one of the most important missing person cases of the 21st century. It is a story that touches on themes of loss, perseverance, justice, and the enduring power of love. It is a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of circumstances, there is hope for truth and justice. The final chapter of Liam Porter's story was written not with his disappearance, but with the discovery of his remains and the resolution of the case. The boy who had gone missing while trying to bring comfort to his sick mother had finally been found, and his story would live on as a testament to the power of love and the importance of never giving up on the search for truth. Empty corridor where Liam had been found was sealed once again, but a small memorial plaque was placed at the entrance to the service area. The plaque read, "For Liam Porter, may truth find its way out of the walls." It was a simple tribute to a boy whose story had touched thousands of people, and whose memory would continue to inspire positive change for years to come. The case of Liam Porter was finally closed, but his legacy would continue to live on in the hearts of those who had known him and in the work of the foundation that bore his name. The boy who had simply wanted to visit his sick mother had become a symbol of the importance of protecting children and never giving up on the search for truth and justice. In the end, the story of Liam Porter was not just about a missing boy or a solved case. It was about the power of love, the importance of perseverance, and the belief that even in the darkest circumstances, truth and justice can prevail. It was a story that would continue to inspire and challenge us to create a safer world for all children, one where no child would ever have to endure what Liam Porter had endured. The empty room where Dana Porter had spent her final days was eventually converted into a family counseling center, where families facing medical crises could receive support and assistance. The room became a place of healing and hope, a fitting tribute to a mother who had loved her son more than life itself, and who had never given up hope that he would return to her. The story of Liam Porter ended where it began, with love. The love of a son for his mother, the love of a family for their missing child, and the love of a community that refused to give up on finding the truth. It is a story that reminds us that love endures even in the darkest places, and that the memory of those we've lost can inspire us to create a better world for those who remain.